In this video, we're going to put together our particle effects for our game. We're going to need our projectile particle effects, which will include the projectile itself, as well as the kind of tiny little explosion it'll do on the edge of an asteroid if it hits one. We're also going to do an asteroid explosion effect, because for some reasons asteroids in this universe explode, like they're filled with explosive gas or something. I don't really know how that works, but it
Well, they
works.
are. They are.
Okay, they are. Okay. It looks cool regardless. Um, and we're also going to put together our engine trail. Now, the way that I'm going to do the particles for the projectiles is going to be through a particle system, which isn't the most efficient way of doing particles, but for the purposes of this game, because we won't have as many particles on screen as we could if we had maybe other player ships or things like that, we're not going to run into a bottleneck. Again, you should always optimize for things that you're actually going to use in a particular project and not worry about things that don't need to be worried about until they do need to be worried about. I don't know how much sense that made, but it made sense in my mind.
That's all that's important, man.
Indeed. Um, so yeah, in this case, we want our particle effects to, or our projectiles to look good, and we can achieve that effect using the particle system. It also gives us an excuse to play with particles, which is always fun. You'll notice that I did load up my Scratch scene because that's where I'm going to be working with the particle systems in, and I kind of reorganized my Unity layout just a tad, so I got some more space with my inspector and some more space in my viewport. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete my waypoint, and then I'm going to, well, put together a particle system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go game object, create other particle system, and I'm going to center it. So I'm going to take the well, not center it, but I'm going to put it in the origin, which is at 0, 0, 0, and I'm going to zoom up on it so we can take a look at our system. So this particle system will be used for our projectile. It doesn't really look like a projectile right now, so let's go ahead and fix some of the most obvious issues with it. Now, first of all, our shape is a little wrong. I'm going to take this down. What that affects is that affects the speed of the projectiles. I'm going to bring in the radius completely. And I'm going to bring the angle down like so. I'm also going to orient it like this. So now it's looking a little bit more like a projectile already. Kind of. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off looping, and I'm going to set the duration to 2 seconds. So now it'll simply simulate for 2 seconds, and then it'll stop simulating. Now, the lifetime is actually set really high at this point, so let's bring the lifetime down to 2.5 seconds. With these parameters, it'll give me about the length I want, because what we're going to do here in a moment is we're going to modify the size of the projectiles, as well as their colors and all that fun stuff. So the size of our projectiles are going to be controlled over the lifetime of them, and they're going to be controlled via a curve. I might actually want to do a random between two curves. Let's just play around with this a little bit. So let's say size over lifetime, I'm going to check that, and then I'm going to set it up. Let's just try a curve first. I'm going to do a gradual curve like that, and then I'm going to hit simulate, and I mean that looks pretty good, I guess. Let's try a random between two curves just to get a little bit of variation. So I'm going to click this little drop down. I'm going to say random between two curves, and let's start the size off at 1. And let's go ahead and fix the curves up so they kind of look like that last curve that we had, but just have the second curve be maybe something like that to give it a kind of pulsating effect, so it's not really all uniform. Okay, next let's do our color over lifetime. Now our color over lifetime I'm going to set to a random between two gradients. Both gradients I'm going to set their alpha at the end to 0. So that's the first gradient, and then I'm going to open up the second gradient and do the same thing. And so now they kind of fade. Next, let's give them a little bit of color. On the first gradient, I'm going to go with a color. I don't know what color. That doesn't. Maybe blue. I like blue. Blue's a good color. Then I'll do that. Maybe turn it into a slightly deeper blue just to give it some variation. And then this will be maybe a more tealish blue. And then maybe this second curve will have a smaller alpha. And really, there's no wrong answers when it comes to this sort of thing. It's just what you think looks cool. I mean, what do you think about that, Steve?
That's fairly cool looking.
All right. So let's make sure that our default particle is selected, which has an additive shader, which we want. Let's go into what else do we want to do with this? We have color over lifetime, we have size over lifetime. Let's go ahead and up our emission a little bit, maybe from a rate of 10 to a rate of 18. There we go. What the upping the emission, what that's giving us is it's making more little particles, which is giving that glow kind of effect because we're using an additive shader. In fact, if I were to up the emission maybe to 25, we get more of that glow. That kind of appears randomly, partly because I have that random between two gradients. I'm not so happy with on the shape, I'm not so happy with the angle. So I'm going to lower the angle down to 0 and see how that looks. So I think that's looking.
Pretty good. Still kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, it is fuzzy. I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to like simulate or get with like some sort of like glowy effect.
Yeah. Photon torpedo. Energy weapon kind of thing.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, the fact is you can play around with this a whole lot more, and we're going to show a couple more examples of particle systems anyway. So let's go ahead and just leave it like this, and let's integrate it with our basic particle. So I'm going to go back to my project tab, and I'm going to drag out a level 1. And then I'm going to bring my particle, I'm first going to center it on the origin. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my particle system and attach it to level 1. So we get that. And then I'm going to go to level 1 and hit apply. Then I'm going to go to capsule. And unfortunately, this will lose our prefab. So by deleting the capsule child object from our prefab, it will actually destroy our prefab connection. But that's simple enough to fix. So I'll show you guys how to do that. So I'm removing my capsule, which breaks the prefab. So I effectively replaced my particle system with the capsule. Or sorry, I effectively replaced the capsule with the particle system. Now, if you remember, the collider itself is on the level 1 game object. It wasn't on the capsule, which is fine for our purposes because now we can effectively replace the visual representation with our particle effect. So now we've done that, let's go back to our project. I'm going to actually entirely delete our level 1 projectile prefab out of our project. And then I'm going to drag over level 1 back into projectiles. Then that is going to break one other connection that we have in our scene, and that's under basic weapon, is set to the old level 1 projectile, which no longer exists. So I need to click on the basic weapon, go to my inspector, and actually, no, it didn't lose it. Well, that was convenient. I guess I tricked Unity into doing that. Huh. Either way, we now have our particle system attached to our level 1 projectile. So going back into our garbage game test scene, we should have that. Looking good?
Looking good.
Okay. The next effect I want to do is when a projectile hits a asteroid, I want to instantiate another particle system for just kind of indicating where on the asteroid that hit occurred. And that's very easy to do. The first step is I'm going to put together the particle system itself. Then I'm going to go in and add some code into my projectile mono behavior that instantiates that explosion effect when it hits an asteroid, or any destroyable for that matter, and then write another script to automatically destroy that particle system once it's done playing. So jumping back into our garbage scratch scene, I'm going to delete level 1 because we're no longer working with this prefab, and I'm going to go to Game Object, Create Other Particle System. Now this particle system is going to be incredibly simple. Let's go ahead and set it to 0, 0, 0. We're just going to use that same effect. What I'm going to do is, again, so this one is just this tiny little, I guess you could say, like, dust speck. So let's go ahead and give it a duration of like 0.35 or something like that. Take off looping. So now it looks like that. Let's change the emission, or sorry, the shape into a sphere. Let's change the radius to 0.01, and that'll give us that effect. So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Then let's change our color over, well, yeah, let's change our color over the words. Color over lifetime so that it fades. Maybe have it, instead of go to white, maybe have it kind of go to black. All right, that's good. Now we need to change the actual lifetime of the particles because they're alive for way, way, way too long. So let's change the lifetime to like 0.3. Let's also change the speed to like 1.5. And let's simulate it. Okay, that's kind of what I want, a little dust effect. Maybe the color itself shouldn't fade all the way until the end. And then let's change, maybe set the size, or how about size over lifetime? That's always fun. Let's change the size to go from like 0.7 to 0. No, I don't really like that. Let's do that. Okay, let's up the duration a little bit to 0.5. That's fine. Bring the start speed down to maybe 1.1 so they don't go as far away. And again, this is a really subtle effect, but I really like it personally, and it gives us an excuse to take a look at how we can integrate particle systems with code. I'm spending way too much time on this, aren't I?
It's fun.
Yeah, it is. Maybe change the rate to 15 so that there's a little bit more of a dust effect. Okay, so now it looks kind of like when we hit an asteroid at a particular point, the little dust effect will appear. So that's cool. So let's go back into our project and turn our particle system into a prefab, but I'm going to call it, how about dust? And then I'm going to turn it into a prefab. I'm going to create a new prefab folder called effects. And I'm going to click and drag dust into effects. Okay, so now we have to do a couple things with code. Now, first of all, we need to write code inside of our particles that will allow us to add the dust particle effect to it in the form of a prefab and have it instantiate that effect when the particle hits an asteroid. So let's do that first. I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, and I'm going to go into my projectile, and I'm going to say public game object, or how about effect. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so when it gets destroyed, what I want to do is right before it gets destroyed, I want to say instantiate effect at transform.position and transform.rotation. So that means it'll instantiate this game object when it hits something else on its current position. So that's pretty much all we need to do for our particle or projectiles themselves. We will run into a problem, but we'll see that problem in a moment here. So now we've done that. Let's go under projectiles under level 1. Click back on an inspector. Go down to our projectile script onto our effect property. Click this little target icon and select dust. Just double click on it. So now that we've wired that up to our prefab, I can go back into project, scenes, game test, and hit play and see how our game is looking. Okay, so that could definitely be made a little bit better, but I think it gets the point across. It's a very, very, very subtle effect for how our projectiles... Maybe if I made these asteroids have more health, it would be more noticeable. But see, if I only tap it a couple times, you'll see that the dust does indeed appear. So it kind of looks like we're hitting something physical. So how do you like that, Steve?
I love that. It's very cool. Particle effects are the funnest part.
Yes, they are. But we have a problem. Let's go ahead and pause our scene and look at the problem. See the problem?
What's all that?
Those are our particle systems. Particle systems do not automatically blow themselves up once they are done emitting particles.
Well, you're not going to want to play very long at that point then.
Yeah, because eventually there'll be so many game objects in the system that it'll just get clogged. So what I want to do is I need to create some sort of way to automatically destroy a particle system once it's done with its effect. It's actually very simple to do. Going back into Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new mono behavior and I'm going to call it Auto Destroy Particle System. The Auto Destroy Particle System is going to be a mono behavior, and it's going to have one method, public void update, and it's going to have one field, public particle system. The update method of Auto Destroy Particle System is going to say if not system.isAlive, then I'm going to pass in true to say are you alive or are any of your children alive? So if this is not the case, then we will destroy the game object in its entirety, which will include destroying the Auto Destroy Particle System script as well as destroy the particle system itself. So how do we use this? Well, going back into Unity, I'm going to jump back into my Scratch scene, go to my dust prefab, then I'm going to go back to my inspector, I'm going to close out my particle system thing, and I'm going to go to add component and say auto destroy particle system, hit enter, and then I'm going to click and drag particle system onto the system property, and then I'm going to hit apply. So that's all that needs to be done in order to get the dust game object to be blown up when it's no longer being used. So going back into my game test scene, oh, come on. There you go. Let's go ahead and see what happens. So I'm going to blow up a couple asteroids. And then I'm going to hit pause, and I'm going to see if there are any more dust clones, and there are, well, there are a couple, but I think these ones are still active. So that's fine. Let's unpause, wait a second, and there, you saw them disappear. Okay, so stopping our game, we now have two particle systems created, one for our projectiles and one for when our projectile hits an object. But we need two more. We're going to need our engine trail and we're going to need our explosion. So going back into our scratch scene, I'm going to delete the dust game object. I'm going to go to game object, create other particle system. I'm going to center it by going to inspector and setting its position to 0, 0, 0. That's not actually centering it, that's putting it on the origin. And let's go ahead and make an explosion real fast. So, how do we make an explosion? Well, we're going to need some textures that we don't currently have. Fortunately, Unity comes with a couple textures that we could use for our particles. They are available for us inside of the Particle System Asset package, which we can get to by going to the Assets menu, Import Package, Particles. And then I'm going to say Import All. Now, if you're not the adventurous type, I believe they do come with some standard explosions. Well, they come up with some standard fire and flame. And here, legacy particles explosions. Now, this is a legacy particle system, which uses the old weird particle emitters and particle animators and particle renderers component. It's not as powerful as the newer system. So we're not going to be using these. But we will use some of the same textures. Sound good?
That sounds awesome.
All right, so going back into our inspector, onto our particle system, I'm going to leave it looping for now. We're going to change it to one-off in a moment, but for now we're going to leave it looping. The first step is I'm going to go all the way down to renderer, and I'm going to change the material. I'm going to change the material to one of these flames. Let's do flame D. So now we are emitting flame textures that we got from our standard particle package. But the emission isn't as good as we want it to be. The shape isn't what we want it to be. The shape, not surprisingly, is going to be a sphere. So now we have these explosion particles being thrown all over the place. Let's bring the radius of the sphere down because we want to have it seem like they're coming out of a central place. Let's then go and start playing with the other effects. So again, you can try to keep me
all right,
relatively
get it done. Get it done. Stop playing.
Okay. Let's go to 1. Let's give the start lifetime to about 1.2 seconds. So they're not alive for very long. Well, maybe 1.5 to 6 seconds. Let's give the start speed like 1.4, I guess. Start size, let's go up to like 7. So now we have a really, really big explosion. It's already starting to look like an explosion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's doing good.
Let's go ahead and rotate over lifetime. So I'll give the angular velocity maybe 50. Let's go ahead and say color over lifetime. And let's have it fade out. So I'm going to go to here, set the alpha to 0. Let's also throw in like kind of maybe an orange tint at the beginning. No, let's start off with a white tint and have it kind of fade into an orange tint. Because as the fire gets further away from the center, it gets kind of...
Orangier. You know you wanted to say it.
Yes, okay. It gets orangier. Because of the way light waves work.
Because of the way fire works in the vacuum of space.
Yes. Okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and give our what are we missing here? We're missing something. Something isn't right. Let's up our emission, maybe to 35. That actually looks pretty good. Actually, I want to do a curve on the rate. I want to start at 35 and then slowly go down to maybe that. So that means we emit fewer particles as the duration expires. So that looks good. And then maybe change the start size to a curve as well, starting at 7 and maybe going down to a little bit smaller. Make it curve like that. That's definitely not what we want. There we go. I think that's fine. It doesn't have as much force as I would want it to. Um, Actually, no, that doesn't look fine. We do something like that. No, bring down the start size. God. Steve, you're doing a terrible job of keeping me on track. Something like that. Um, I kind of want to increase the velocity just a tiny bit over time. So we'll start at a speed of maybe 2 and go down. So the first few particles that are created will go further away than the last few particles that are created. Maybe up the there we go. That's a little too high, but that's exactly what I was going for. Something like that. So then later in the particle system, the sprites don't go as fast and they're not as big. So it makes it sort of look like there was an initial explosion which caused fire to be thrown everywhere, and then it sort of kind of slowed down and died when it got to the center, or got to the end. All right, I think that's fine. You think that's fine?
Yeah, absolutely. Load it up, man.
Okay, so to hook this up, we need to go into back to our project, and let's rename our particle system Explosion. Before we turn this into a prefab, I'm going to go back into the inspector, and I'm going to add the auto destroy particle system script to it, which we can reuse. And I'm going to click and drag the particle system onto the system to monitor. So now this will be automatically destroyed, which is good. Going back into project, let's turn this into a prefab by dropping it right onto effects. Then we're going to go back into our scene, our game test scene, and we do have to write a little bit of code. We need to have the asteroids know which explosion prefab they're going to use when they blow up. In fact, this is going to be virtually the exact same logic that we added to our projectile model behavior, in that we're going to add a public game object effect, and then we're going to instantiate it when it gets destroyed. So going into our asteroid script, I'm going to go ahead and say public game object effect. Then I'm going to scroll all the way down to the destroyed method. And I'm going to say instantiate effect at transform.position and transform rotation, and then close out that line. And that is literally all we have to do to get the particle effect inside of our asteroid. So jumping back into Unity, the last thing we got to do is open up our prefabs folder, click on asteroid, go into our inspector, find our asteroid script, and then use the little target button on the effect property and locate our explosion, which is the uppercase explosion, not the lowercase one. That's the one that the Unity guys made. So now if I hit play, let's see what happens. And that is really small.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be huge.
I think I was like zoomed in, like really, like way too much. Let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go back into scenes, scratch, and look at my explosion again. I'm going to drag out an asteroid for comparison, and we can see that the default size of the asteroid is that. So let's go ahead and increase the size of our explosion, which should be pretty straightforward. We go into our particle system, we go to our start size curve, and I'm going to bump this up to like 20 and have it go down to that. I'm also going to decrease the duration to like 0.5. Maybe 0.6.
All right, stop it.
Okay, now I'm going to hit the apply button to apply our changes to our prefab. Then I'm going to jump back into our game test and hit play. And we should have big explosions now. Or bigger explosions. Okay, so the quality of our explosions can definitely use some time, but that's just a matter of playing around with the particle system and getting used to how to modify the different effects that you have available to you.
I actually kind of like that if you have to nail something really close to you, you lose line of sight.
Line of sight?
Yeah, you can't see what else is behind that as you're flying because of the huge explosion.
Oh, right, yeah.
So you're motivated to shoot them far away.
Yep. Okay. So that's pretty much it for our explosions. Again, we can play around with that a lot more if we wanted to, and if we had time to. So let's go ahead and do our engine effect next. Our engine effect is going to be fun. So going back into our scratch scene, I'm going to remove asteroid and explosion, and I'm going to go to game object, create other particle system, and I'm going to bring it to the origin, like always. And let's go ahead and get started. So this one's going to be fun. Like I said many times. It's going to be really fun.
It's because they're so much fun.
Oh, yeah. Okay, the way I want to do this is let's go ahead and start off with a duration, bring it down to 2. Keep looping on. I want to go ahead and pre-warm it. Start lifetime, let's do 0.3. I'm going to make these go super fast. So let's say 4.5. Or, well, when I say fast, you'll see what I mean. Start size, let's go to 0.5. Keep the start rotation normal. Start color is fine. We're going to override that anyway. We'll talk about simulation space here in a moment once we get the effect down. And then we'll keep on play on awake. Now emission, I want this to be an incredibly dense particle system, so I'm going to set it to 200. And we can get away with that because, you know what, we're only going to have one player trail in this game, so we don't really care about the emission rate as much as we would for other things. Okay, let's go ahead and do our color over lifetime, because you know that's one of my favorite ones.
Yes, it is.
We're going to do something pretty standard with fading. The gradient is going to be a little interesting, though. We're going to want to kind of fade it slow then fast, if that makes sense. So we want it to do that. And then we'll bring another one over here with an alpha of like 0. Maybe like right here. Next up, we want to make it yellow. Yellowish. So it looks like...
Lean into the green so it looks like plasma.
Okay, there we go. And we'll do that. We can play around with that more in a little bit if Steve lets me.
It's not going to happen.
Let's go ahead and do size over lifetime. Actually, I want to do the shape next because our shape, my shape's really bugging me. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove shape entirely, so we get that. So now it's literally just in a straight line. Now that doesn't really look like anything other than a glowy capsule. So let's go ahead and fix up our size over lifetime. Go down to 0. I actually kind of want to do like a line right there and then maybe one down here. Maybe increase the start lifetime a little bit so it looks kind of like that. There's definitely way too many particles. We don't need all those particles. All right, so to get the effect we're looking at, actually doesn't have as much to do with the size as it has to do with the color. So I'm going to go back to my color, and the problem is I accidentally one of the problems is that I accidentally set my my stop right here to an alpha of 0. I actually want to give it like an alpha of like that, so we get that sort of really cool little.
Yeah, that conical tail on it.
Yep. Then I'm actually going to not start with yellow or yellowish green. I'm going to start with white to give it the effect that it's like really glowing at the at the beginning, so it's like really hot. And then it kind of fades into that green. And then at the end, I'm going to turn it into black, so it fades away even more. So we kind of get this cool little trail. I'm going to reset my size curve to a straight line so that we get that.
I bet we could do with a few less particles too.
Yeah, I'm going to drop this down to like 130 particles on our emission rate.
That looks pretty good.
Awesome. So now that we put this together, I'm going to turn it into a prefab. So I'm going to call it engine trail. I'm going to click and drag and bring it over into effects. Then I'm going to go back into game test, and I'm going to save the scratch scene. And I'm going to attach it to my player. So I'm going to bring engine trail in. I'm going to bring it to the origin. Then I'm going to position it on the player by going to the Y axis and dumping it right there. And dumping it right there. And make it seem like it's coming out of the engine a little bit. I think it could be a little bit bigger. Also, I'm going to be sure to parent it to my player. But the engine trail could be bigger, so let's go over my size over lifetime, and let's simply increase this. So now if we hit play, we now have a cool little engine trail effect.
Nice.
With a lot of particles. But let's do something cool. Watch what happens when I go to my particle system and I select, instead of simulation space local, simulation space world.
That's pretty cool.
So now, depending on how we rotate, we'll get a different effect. And it doesn't look quite perfect when we're going super fast, because now you see the particles are starting to drop off a little bit too quickly. But that is definitely something that can be played with and tweaked to whatever your needs are.
I like that. Kind of helps you keep your equilibrium.
Yep. So you can see exactly how you're rotating with the mouse. Okay, so let's click back on our player and be sure to hit apply, which will bring that engine trail to every time we've instantiated the player prefab. We can prove that by going to project and going to our levels and going to level 1, being sure to save our game test scene. And we can see that our engine trail did indeed come along for the ride.
Nice.
Okay, so I think I'm out of excuses to play with the particle system. Unless you can think of one.
Nope, always the longest video. I'm not going to enable you.
It is fun. I'm not the best designer or artist for like obviously you guys can see that, but the idea is that you can definitely play around with this stuff to the extent of how much time you have available, because you could pretty much spend forever on this.
Oh yeah, could spend a lifetime in particle effects. It's the coolest.
Anyway, so yeah, I think that pretty much pretty much wraps up our special effects for our game. So
All right.
see you guys next video.